This is a fine piece of meat, looking mouth-watering, but it is not meant for human consumption. It is for the dogs, because they have a tough battle ahead of them. In the Ruby Valley of Montana, the cold winter has quietly arrived. Food in the mountains has become scarce, and starving wild beasts turn their eyes to the livestock in the ranches. Rich, as an experienced hunter, naturally cannot sit idly by, and so his first job of the year has arrived. A rancher 15 miles away called for help, saying he lost a few goats and suspects a mountain lion is behind it. The location is extremely remote, making it impossible for vehicles to drive in. Rich has no choice but to bring out his old mule from home to transport the dogs. Because the trail is rough and rugged, to prevent the mule from injuring its legs, Rich walks very carefully. But this makes the journey miserable for the two dogs in the transport box, tossing them around until they are dizzy and almost throw up. Fortunately, they finally reach their destination. Although the flock of goats has already been moved by the rancher, the threat of the mountain lion remains. Next, it is time for the hounds to show their prowess. Rich lets the dogs out. Axe takes the lead, though his steps are a bit odd, seemingly still dizzy from the bumpy ride. Turbo also follows closely behind. The two dogs start catching a scent on the ridge. Not long after, the dogs start barking up the mountain, but listening to the commotion, Rich feels something is wrong. This is not the signal of finding a mountain lion. Rather, the hounds have encountered something else. Anxious, Rich mounts his horse and immediately rushes over. The horse also senses his mood and instinctively speeds up. Nearing the area, Rich chooses to dismount and pulls out his handgun, ready to deal with unknown dangers at any moment. In this wilderness, the most dangerous animal isn't a mountain lion. As he pushes aside the bushes, a terrible scene meets his eyes. A brutally killed goat lies in the snow. Judging from the tracks, this wasn't the work of a mountain lion, but a wolf pack. In this territory, over 600 wolves live, and their numbers are constantly surging. If the hounds encounter a wolf pack, their chances of survival are incredibly slim. It is only then that Rich realizes his hound, Turbo, is missing. Terrified, he calls out loudly. Luckily, after searching for a while, he finally finds Turbo nearby. Rich breathes a huge sigh of relief. Because a wolf pack is incredibly dangerous to deal with, he decides to retreat first, go home to prepare his weapons, and then come back to deal with these predators. 2 days later, Rich enters the mountains again. This time he comes prepared. Instead of bringing the previous tracking hounds, he brings a guard dog. Arriving at the previous kill site, he finds that the snow has buried the corpse. He cleans up the scene. He confirms the goat has been completely eaten, which means the wolf pack will not return here. But through the faint tracks on the ground, he still finds the direction the wolf pack headed. So Rich immediately starts tracking them. Finally, he follows the trail to a fence, where a tuft of wolf hair catches his attention. After studying the tracks, he concludes that the wolf pack ran towards the Rocky Mountain. But Rich is not in a hurry to chase them. Instead, he takes out some red cloth. This is a psychological tactic used by old herdsmen, making it clear to the wolf pack that he knows they've been here. Wolves are very smart and can understand this message. However, this trick only serves as a temporary scare. To solve the problem permanently, he has to get real. Rich climbs to the top of the hill and uses binoculars to observe, finding what seems to be a cave on the opposite side. This is absolutely a perfect place for an ambush. Getting closer, he sees the ground is covered with broken bones. It really is a wolf den. Now that he has found the place, the ultimate battle of wits and courage begins. Wolves are incredibly cunning animals. Ordinary traps won't fool them at all. Rich racked his brain. He wrapped his steel trap in wax paper to effectively block the metallic scent. Then, using a pot lid, he scooped up some dirt and sand, sprinkling it evenly over the trap to completely conceal it. Next, he took out a deer gland and buried it in a small hole behind the trap as bait. But the most brilliant part came next. Rich took out a bottle of coyote urine and sprinkled it on a nearby rock, then used snow to cover his own footprints. Finally, he used the bottle to forge a trail of coyote prints. The purpose of this elaborate setup was to simulate a scenario where a coyote had dragged deer remains into the den. No matter how cunning the wolves were, this would lower their guard. Rich set up another trap nearby. By the time he finished, it was completely dark. Rich found a nearby cave and built a fire inside. Though freezing outside, the cave was very warm. He intended to catch some sleep, but a mournful wolf howl instantly jolted him awake. He immediately grabbed his rifle. Outside, the howling echoed one after another, making his scalp tingle. Rich's sleepiness vanished. His guard dog, eyes wide, barked fiercely into the darkness. Even if it meant risking its life, it was ready to protect its master. Facing the terrifying wolf pack, the guard dog showed no fear, because Rich was its strongest backing. This man and dog duo possessed an aura of one man holding the pass against 10,000 enemies. Now, the battle between man and wolf was on the verge of breaking out. The wolf pack had devoured a poor goat. Rich went to the wolf den to set traps, seeking revenge, but unexpectedly found himself surrounded by the pack at night. Thanks to the rifle in his hands, he made it through the night safely. The next day, Rich packed his gear, extinguished the fire, and went to check the wolf traps. Night is the wolves' domain, but now that the sun was up, it was Rich's turn to show his might. However, he didn't act recklessly. Halfway there, he scanned the area with his binoculars to avoid walking into an ambush. After confirming the area was clear, he dismounted, loaded his rifle, and cautiously approached the den. Snowflakes began to fall from the sky, adding an invisible layer of desolation. Rich craned his neck to look and found the first trap had not been triggered. Wolves are cunning indeed. Such an elaborate trap couldn't fool them. He moved to the second trap, and it was empty too. It seemed the pack had noticed something amiss. Since the traps failed, Rich decided to take the initiative. First, he had to figure out where the pack went. Rich started searching for clues and actually found something. There was a fresh set of wolf tracks in the snow, belonging to a young male. Following this trail, he found more clues and eventually reached a terrifying conclusion. This was a young lone wolf that had just been driven out by the pack. No wonder it attacked the goats on the ranch. Fighting alone made it hard for him to hunt wild prey, forcing him into human territory. But desperados like this are the most dangerous. They'll do anything to survive. Rich realized he had to kill this wolf, or else this area would never see peace. Just as he was pondering, a dark shadow suddenly darted out of the bushes. The wolf was hiding nearby. This was an attempted ambush. Rich reacted swiftly, instantly raising his rifle. But the wolf didn't take the chance to flee. Instead, it circled the bushes, trying to get closer to Rich. It still wanted to attack. This filled Rich with fury. He raised his gun and fired a shot, but unfortunately missed, letting the wolf escape. Still, this shot was enough to leave psychological trauma on the beast. Rich tied another red cloth to a branch, warning the wolf that this was human territory. Trusting the wolf's intelligence, it probably wouldn't dare return in the short term. But the battle between man and wolf wouldn't end here. Upon returning home, Rich faced an anxiety-inducing situation. His dog, Brandy, was missing. He was already 15 years old and had rendered outstanding service to Rich. Yet, in his twilight years, he had vanished for a full 8 hours. Given his failing eyesight and severe cataracts, he likely got lost. Rich called out time after time, but received no response. He tracked a faint set of footprints in the snow all the way into the bushes, but the trail went cold there. Because it was too dark, he had to abandon the search for the night and wait for daybreak. Finally, enduring until dawn, Rich drove his truck and immediately resumed tracking. His biggest fear right now was that Brandy had caught the scent of a mountain lion and went to hunt it down alone. With his current physical condition, if he encountered a mountain lion by himself, it would be a disaster. Arriving at yesterday's bushes, Rich found the footprints here to be very chaotic. To figure out the exact direction, he needed the help of his hounds. He brought out 2 helpers from his truck. Since these hounds were trained to hunt mountain lions, Rich worried they might track the wrong target. Therefore, he didn't unleash them right away. Only after confirming they were on the right scent did Rich let go of the leashes, allowing them to sprint at full speed. It didn't take long before barking echoed on the mountain. Rich hurried over, but the sight before him instantly brought tears to his eyes. His worst fear had come true. Brandy lay there quietly. He had stopped breathing. Rich took off his jacket and gently draped it over Brandy. At this moment, he understood the reason. Brandy had sensed his own impending death. For a hound that had fought battles its entire life, the best resting place to die naturally was the wilderness. But how could Rich bear to leave his body in this freezing snow? He picked Brandy up and choked out, "Let's go home." Rich placed him on the hood of the truck, the highest honor reserved exclusively for a lead dog. On the way back, Rich could no longer hide the sorrow in his heart. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Upon returning to the ranch, Rich dug a special grave to send off this old comrade on his final journey, thanking him for his unreserved loyalty and dedication throughout his life. He wished him a peaceful journey. Meanwhile, a bobcat had broken into his property and killed a bunch of snow-white rabbits. This wasn't just foraging, it felt more like revenge. Its actions angered the hounds at home, and it was eventually chased up a tree, caught red-handed by Rich, who had just returned. Looking at the tragic scene, Rich burned with anger and wanted nothing more than to kill the bobcat right then and there. But thinking of Brandy, who had just passed away, a trace of compassion arose in his heart. He didn't want to take a life so easily, so he decided to spare the bobcat. He hit the tree trunk with a wooden stick, trying to scare the troublemaker away. But this bobcat had nerves of steel and didn't flinch at all. Rich lost his patience, grabbed a chainsaw, and started cutting down the tree, thinking if it gets crushed to death, it's just its bad luck. Soon the large tree crashed down. The bobcat stretched out in midair and bolted the moment it hit the ground. Although Rich intended to spare its life, he still needed to intimidate it to prevent it from returning. So, he released a few hounds to teach it a lesson and make it remember. The bobcat ran incredibly fast in front, with the hound Capone following closely behind. Both sides darted across the steep rocks, creating a spectacular scene. Normally, a hound wouldn't risk climbing such rocky peaks, showing just how furious Capone was. Capone had the best relationship with Brandy. Brandy's passing had already made it deeply sorrowful, and then this bobcat dared to break into their home and cause such a terrible incident. Capone, filled with rage, was determined to vent it on the bobcat. Rich worried about the hound's safety and hurried over to stop them. By the time he arrived, the hounds had cut off the bobcat's escape route and cornered it at the edge of a cliff. Only at this moment did the bobcat feel fear. Seeing that his goal was achieved, Rich called off the hounds and prepared to take them away. But an unexpected thing happened. The new leader, Axe, actually charged at the bobcat again, forcing it to jump off the cliff, and Axe himself leaped down after it. It seemed Capone wasn't the only angry one. As the lead dog, guarding the home was Axe's bottom line. If a bobcat dared to run wild in their home, it had to pay the price. Watching the bobcat fleeing in panic, Rich nodded in satisfaction. Presumably, it would never dare to come back again. Since all the domestic rabbits were killed by the bobcat, these were originally emergency food for the winter. Rich set his sights on wild hares to make up for the loss. Soon, he arrived at a thicket, a habitat for wild hares. He planned to use traditional skills to set up traps using willow branches. He chose a resilient willow branch and bent it into a loop, the height just right to catch a rabbit's neck. He then built a funnel with branches on the side to force the rabbit into the loop. This was a classic snare. As soon as the rabbit struggled, the noose would tighten around its neck until it perished. At this time of year, wild hares are very active, making it the perfect time to catch them. To be safe, Rich set up more traps. He found a natural trail halfway up the hill, a must-pass route for the hares. He took out 2 steel traps and buried them in the dirt, one behind the other. The hopping rabbits might dodge the first, but they wouldn't escape the second. After setting the traps, Rich went home to wait. The next day, he returned to the high ground to check the traps. He came to the trail and found a trap had been triggered, but only a leg remained. The body was nowhere to be seen. This made Rich furious, wondering what blasted creature had come here for a free buffet. Rich looked around but found no clues about the thief. He continued to the next trap, which finally offered some comfort. A plump wild hare lay quietly in the trap. It seemed this traditional method was very reliable. Rich felt thrilled. This gave him more of a sense of achievement than hunting with a gun. Now he had to process this hare. He hung it on a tree and started skinning it. Although one hare couldn't make up for the losses caused by the bobcat, it was a good start. As long as he was on the right track, he could expect a steady supply of rabbits. Rich went home fully satisfied. In the Ruby Valley, the threat from mountain lions and wolf packs is growing day by day. To meet this challenge, the hound team must always be in peak condition. So, every few days, Rich takes them for a 10-mile long-distance run. Today, a new member has joined the team, Diamond, who just turned 1 year old. Rich will pay close attention to him to see his potential. As the truck speeds up, the hounds hit their stride. Running is an instinct carved into their genes. Through the rearview mirror, Rich notices the veteran Turbo falling to the back. Time forgives no one. Not only has he slowed down, but he has also visibly gained weight. It seems necessary to put him on a diet plan. In contrast, young Diamond is bursting with energy, not only keeping up with the pack but also performing outstandingly. But running is just a warm-up. Next is training their core skill, their sense of smell. Rich prepares a few items, a deer gland and an animal hide soaked in mountain lion urine. First, he drags the deer gland, leading a trail to a tree. Then, he drags the hide in another direction, deliberately crossing a small stream, because water washes away the scent, creating a massive challenge for the hounds. After setting up the test, Rich begins the trial. The experienced veteran Turbo is not confused by the route and heads straight for the hide. The young Diamond runs around like a headless fly, seemingly at a loss. Rich takes note of their performances. In the end, as expected, Turbo is the first to find the hide, but the second place is somewhat surprising. It is the youngest, Diamond. Rich understands that Diamond didn't track the scent but simply followed the veteran. This shows he lacks the makings of a lead dog, but is definitely a qualified subordinate. This training session was highly valuable. Spring blossoming means everything is coming back to life. Not only can he eat delicious rabbits, but it's also a great time to pick up some money. This is a traditional activity unique to mountain men. Around this time every year, elk and moose naturally shed their antlers to prepare for new growth. Rich, as the local guardian, naturally won't miss this opportunity to make some cash. He takes the youngest hound, Diamond, into the mountains, giving him a chance to train. Entering the forest, Diamond seems incredibly excited, his nose glued to the ground, sniffing everywhere. Soon, he stops in front of a pile of fresh elk droppings. Rich touches it. It's still warm, meaning the elk just left. He unleashes Diamond to let him roam freely while he follows slowly behind. Soon, Diamond disappears from sight, but Rich isn't worried, because once Diamond finds something, he will bark to alert him. But before the hound brings good news, Rich makes a discovery himself. There's an elk antler on the ground. Although its quality is average, it can still fetch $50. Rich is very happy. He wants to look for the other antler. Although an elk has 2 antlers, they usually drop about 2 weeks apart, so finding the other one is pure luck. Unexpectedly, Rich's luck is off the charts. He finds the other one not far away. Now he has $100 in hand. Rich ties the antlers to his backpack and continues looking for Diamond. On the way, he picks up 2 more antlers, but his mood sours because Diamond hasn't made a sound for a long time. He has already lost 1 dog this year and absolutely cannot afford to lose another. Rich drops his backpack and yells for Diamond, hoping he appears quickly, but the dog is nowhere to be seen, so he continues up the mountain. Just as he is burning with anxiety, barking finally comes from ahead. Rich hurries over and sees Diamond guarding a massive object, wagging his tail, waiting for praise. It is a 20-pound moose antler. It will bring in at least $500. Rich generously praises Diamond, extremely satisfied with his performance this time. Man and dog begin their journey back. As the weather continues to warm, the crucial moment finally arrives. This is the rancher's happiest, yet Rich's most worrying time. The cows are calving. With the arrival of new life, starving wild beasts will also set their sights on the ranch. Rich continuously patrols to ensure the herd's safety. Wolves can smell a newborn calf from a mile away. In recent years, the wolf population in Montana has surged, severely impacting the ecological balance. Every year, many calves die tragically in the jaws of wolves. During his patrol, Rich notices an isolated cow. From her condition, she is about to give birth. He quickly hides in the bushes, afraid of disturbing the mother cow. At the same time, Rich keeps his eyes peeled, constantly monitoring the surroundings in case wolves are waiting in ambush. Finally, the calf is born, but it remains motionless for a long time. Rich's heart tightens and he hurries over to check. Seeing a human approach, the mother cow becomes very nervous. Rich soothes her while helping the calf clear the mucus from its nose. Seeing the little one finally take a breath and slowly stand up, Rich breathes a sigh of relief. He continues patrolling the ranch, but his good mood quickly vanishes. At the ranch's boundary, he finds the half-eaten remains of a calf. The wolf pack has indeed struck. Amid his anger, Rich also realizes a problem. Having tasted blood, the pack will definitely return tonight. He needs to plan ahead. He gathers branches and builds 3 bonfires, then herds the cows into an open area. As night falls, he lights the 3 fires. Fire is the most effective way to drive away wolves. Rich crouches nearby, standing guard all night. Finally making it to dawn, he immediately starts counting the herd. He thought the night passed without incident, but unexpectedly, he sees a panicked mother cow without her calf beside her. Rich's heart instantly sinks. He must find the calf immediately. If delayed too long, even if it wasn't taken by a wolf, it will starve to death without milk. At this critical moment, it's up to the guard dog. It continuously sniffs the scent, eventually leading Rich to a small river. Seeing hoofprints on the bank, he gets a bad premonition. A 1-day-old calf wandering alone to such a remote place, the odds are against it. Following the hoofprints, Rich enters the bushes. Faint mooings suddenly come from ahead. Rich immediately follows the sound and finally spots the calf by the river. It is actually still alive. Unfortunately, it is stuck in the river mud and can't get out. Rich grabs an ear with one hand and the tail with the other, helping it up. After a quick check to ensure there are no major injuries, Rich places it on the bank, then takes it to the barn, driving the mother cow in to let them reunite. This little life has been saved. But this is just the beginning. In the days to come, Rich will continue to battle wits and courage with the wild beasts until the calves grow a bit older. Although it is very exhausting, Rich loves these days full of challenges.
Life in the wilderness has an irresistible appeal for men. All kinds of wild animals gather there, offering not only more meat than one could ever finish, but also the chance to make money by trapping furs. In their spare time, they can pick up shed antlers or go fishing for the simple joy of being close to nature, so every day feels full and rewarding. In the far northeastern corner of the United States, in Maine, there is a vast primeval forest. Endless stretches of coniferous woodland cover more than 10 million acres of land, creating a paradise for countless wild animals. From massive moose to smaller creatures like martens, everything can be found here. Primitive scenes of life and death play out every day, and at the same time, this place is also one of the main centers of the logging industry. Charlie has lived here for 30 years. He was once just a hardworking logger, but he did not want to live a repetitive life forever. So this year, he chose the lifestyle of a trapper. It is now late autumn, and Charlie is busy building a cellar for storing food, hoping to finish this important project before the harsh winter arrives. Unfortunately, the weather does not cooperate. 3 days later, a sudden heavy snowfall throws his plans into disarray. To speed things up, he asks a friend to help and cuts the size of the cellar in half, sacrificing space for speed, and only then does he finally complete the project. Next, he has to turn his attention to trapping. He has spent almost all of his savings building his house. Carrying his tools, he walks along a forest trail and soon arrives at a pond where beavers live. Beavers reproduce quickly, and because they feed on tree bark, an overpopulation can seriously damage the forest. So trapping beavers in moderation helps maintain ecological balance. And at the same time, a single beaver pelt can bring in $100 or $200. Back when Charlie worked as a logger, he could earn $40,000 a year. Now he would have to catch 100 beavers just to barely reach that same level. So the pressure on him is enormous. He takes out a trap, a piece of equipment powerful enough to clamp down with around 200 pounds of force. If handled carelessly, it could easily crush a finger. He carefully places it in the water. Besides setting traps for beavers, he also had to set traps for martens and otters. Luxurious, soft, glossy fur has always been prized by wealthy women. However, local regulations stipulated that during each hunting season, a trapper was permitted to catch no more than 25 martens and 10 otters. Even so, meeting that quota could still earn more than $3,000. After setting the traps, Charlie heads home feeling satisfied and waits. 2 days later, he returns to inspect them. One trap fastened to a tree has caught a marten. Charlie lets out a pleased chuckle. This is his first income of the year. After resetting the trap, he moves on to the next one, where he finds another pleasant surprise. A ferret is even more valuable. These 2 pelts alone will bring in at least $200. Although he has not caught any beavers this time, he is still very pleased with the day's results. After all, it is a good start, and he feels full of hope for the season ahead. But the good times do not last long. A blizzard suddenly strikes the forest and badly disrupts his rhythm. Despite the terrible weather, Charlie still decides to go out to work. He brings more traps, planning to patrol more than 100 miles of trapline while checking his existing sets and putting out new ones. Unfortunately, luck is not on his side today. After checking dozens of traps in a row, he finds every one of them empty. Already frustrated, Charlie then runs into even worse trouble. His snowmobile suddenly breaks down. He tries to repair it, but nothing works. As darkness begins to fall, Charlie has no choice but to make a difficult decision. He will have to walk 8 miles back home, a journey that he estimates will take 6 hours. The bitter wind, mixed with blowing snow, lashes against his face with a stinging burn. As he pushes forward, the snow gets deeper and deeper, forcing him to put on snowshoes and struggle through the thick drifts. When night falls completely, he suddenly realizes that he has made a foolish mistake. He forgot to bring his compass. Now he can only feel his way through the darkness by instinct. When he steps onto a newly frozen lake, the cracking sounds beneath his feet send chills down his spine. Charlie walks across it trembling, but luckily fate is on his side and he makes it safely over the ice. After that, he pushes through the dense forest, and after more than 5 hours of exhausting travel, he finally reaches his cabin. Early the next morning, he calls on his friend Jim, and together they head back to the place where the snowmobile broke down. They replace the damaged parts, repair the machine, and Charlie resumes his trapping work. This is what real wilderness life is like. Every single day is full of challenges. Time flies, and before he knows it, half a month of the season has already passed. But Charlie's trapping has not gone well. He has collected only a handful of pelts, far below what he had expected. After all, he is still a beginner, and his lack of experience is showing. Just as he is worrying about this, Jim brings him an exciting piece of news. It is the season when moose shed their antlers, and a single antler can sell for as much as $100. Jim happens to know a good place to look, but plenty of other people will be competing for the same prize, so they have to act immediately. The two men each ride a snowmobile and set off for their destination. Moose are enormous animals with a strong sense of territory. Once enraged, the force of their charge is comparable to a speeding car, so the two of them must also be careful. When they arrive, they decide to split up in order to improve their chances. Charlie carefully studies the subtle signs in the woods, and before long he notices marks on a small tree where a moose has rubbed its antlers. By common sense, a shed antler should be somewhere nearby, but when he digs eagerly beneath the tree, he discovers that someone else has already searched the area clean. For the next 3 hours, Charlie searches the forest in vain, and his mood grows darker and darker. Just when he is about to give up, he unexpectedly spots a beautiful antler on his way back. His confidence returns at once. He hurries off to show it to Jim, only to discover that Jim is proudly waving an antler even larger and more impressive than his own. Charlie cannot help feeling envious. By now, the sun is setting, and it is time for them to head home. Unexpectedly, on the way back, Charlie gets lucky again and finds a second antler. He is overjoyed. It turns out to be a wonderful day, and the two men return home in high spirits. Although picking up antlers has brought in a nice windfall, it is not a long-term solution. Charlie still has to keep his focus on fur trapping, and northern Maine is about to face an unusually cold winter. He needs to make the most of the time left and collect more pelts. A few days later, he and Jim go out to check the trap line. The very first trap makes their hearts sink. Not only has it caught nothing, even the bait has disappeared. The two men exchange bitter smiles, reset the trap, and keep moving. But the second trap is empty as well, and even more suspiciously, the bait there is also gone. Once might be an accident, but twice in a row is no coincidence. Charlie's face grows darker. He realizes that someone is deliberately sabotaging his trapline. When they reach the third trap site, the scene before them confirms his suspicion. The trap has clearly been tampered with, and the bait has been carelessly thrown onto the ground. Furious, Charlie clenches his fists. He feels like he could kill somebody. They rush to the next trap, and there they find that the trap has not only been damaged, but fresh blood has also been left behind. Now Charlie's anger reaches its peak. Just then, the roar of an engine comes from the distance. A man on a snowmobile tears through the trees, and when he sees Charlie and Jim, he does not slow down. Instead, he speeds up and flees. That guilty reaction instantly ignites Charlie's rage. Without a word, he takes off in pursuit. A thrilling chase begins. Driven by anger, Charlie keeps accelerating and gradually closes the gap. But just as he is about to force the thief to stop, disaster strikes. Charlie's snowmobile crashes into a small tree, and the enormous momentum hurls him through the air. When Jim reaches him, Charlie is lying motionless in the snow. His face is pale and grim, but his handsome sunglasses have miraculously survived without a scratch. The nearest hospital is 70 miles away, and Charlie is in no condition to drive, so Jim can only take him home first and then go off alone to find a doctor. At dawn the next morning, Jim finally returns with the doctor. After a preliminary examination, the doctor believes there are no broken bones, but there may be tendon damage, and advises Charlie to go to the hospital for a full checkup. This sudden accident makes Charlie's already difficult situation even worse. Because of a torn tendon, he spends 4 full weeks resting at home, nearly going out of his mind. To help ease his frustration, his good friend Jim invites him to go ice fishing on a lake 20 miles from the cabin. After a while, the two of them reach their destination. Charlie has brought a lot of fishing gear, but all of it is old-fashioned. Jim cannot help teasing him, saying those things went out of date 15 years ago, and that everyone uses high-tech equipment now. He takes out an auger and quickly drills several fishing holes through the ice. Charlie prepares a few small fish as bait, then takes out another old piece of gear, a spring-loaded flag device that pops up whenever a fish bites. While the two men are busy setting their lines, a fierce north wind suddenly sweeps across the lake. But that does nothing to dampen their enthusiasm. One of them drills the holes while the other sets the lines. Then Jim suddenly shouts, "One of the flags has sprung up." Charlie rushes over to check it, and sure enough, there is a catch on the line. But it is only a coarse-fleshed freshwater fish, the kind usually used as bait for bigger fish. Disappointed, Charlie lowers the line back into the hole. Just as he adjusts the flag, the line suddenly goes tight. Surprised but quick to react, Charlie hauls it in fast and ends up catching a delicious fish. Hearing the good news, Jim comes over to join the excitement, full of envy, and decides that he has to catch one himself. Unfortunately, his luck is poor, and the next few fish he pulls up are all unappetizing ones. While Charlie is gathering those fish together, Jim suddenly lets out another shout. This time, he has finally hooked a big one. His excited yell echoes across the empty lake. As the wind grows harsher and harsher, the two men decide to quit while they are ahead, and they head home in high spirits. Catch a small fish, hook it, toss it into the ice hole, wait a moment, and you can catch an even bigger fish. The joy of this moment simply cannot be expressed in words. This is the vast forest of northern Maine, where abundant wild resources nurture a large number of mountain men who rely on it for a living. Driven by the yearning in his heart, Charlie gave up his lucrative logging job and chose this adventurous lifestyle. However, fate dealt him a harsh blow. While chasing a thief who sabotaged his traps, he suffered a severe snowmobile accident, resulting in a torn tendon that forced him to rest for a full month. Now, with his savings nearly depleted, Charlie faces severe financial pressure. Even though his arm hasn't fully healed, he has to restart his trapping work. Arriving at the pond where the beavers live, Charlie struggles to chop through the ice layer with one hand and retrieves the beaver trap he set earlier. Unfortunately, it yields no catch, leaving him inevitably a bit disappointed. But he quickly pulls himself together, using an axe to scrape off some tree bark, which is a beaver's favorite food. After resetting the trap, Charlie heads to the next location. Although his injured shoulder causes him great trouble, a determined light shines in his eyes, because this carefree life is exactly what he has dreamed of since childhood. For this, he is willing to pay any price, and heaven rewards the hardworking. In the next trap, there is finally a catch. It is a plump beaver. Charlie cannot help but laugh out loud. But soon, he stops laughing, because opening the trap with one hand is a massive challenge. He is forced to use his injured arm, and the bursts of piercing pain from the wound make him suffer immensely. After multiple efforts, he finally opens the trap, releases the prey, and resets the trap. Carrying the heavy beaver on his shoulder and humming a hometown tune, he walks briskly toward the snowmobile. The depression of the past month vanishes at this moment, and good luck follows. In the next trap, there is surprisingly another catch. Charlie drags it out with great effort, and estimates that this beaver weighs at least 40 pounds. This is the first time Charlie has caught 2 beavers in a single day, and his joy is beyond words. Due to his shoulder injury, it is very difficult for him to carry this beaver back to the snowmobile, so he decides to process the prey on the spot. To prevent his fingers from freezing, he builds a fire, warming himself while skinning the beaver. After a long half-day of work, he finally finishes the skinning. Now he can head back. He first extinguishes the fire, then leaves the beaver meat for the local wild animals, taking only the precious pelt. Charlie is just that generous. He knows how to be content. A few days later, Charlie notices the temperature in the root cellar is a bit too high. This is where all his food is stored, and nothing can go wrong. So, he wants to harvest some ice blocks to put inside to prevent the food from spoiling. He calls his good friend Jim, and the two ride their snowmobiles to a nearby frozen lake. Jim starts the chainsaw and begins cutting into the ice, while Charlie clears the snow on the side. After cutting out a rectangular ice block, they use tongs to pull it out and transport these blocks home. When they return for the second trip, Jim looks at the ice hole and suddenly gets the urge to fish. This is a temptation no man can resist. Charlie is a bit exasperated. Where is the time for this now? The seller is still waiting for a large amount of ice. But Jim has already started fishing, just wanting to catch a few to satisfy his craving. Charlie watches with a smile. Jim is indeed a professional and quickly catches a fish. But the fish is too small and not satisfying enough, so Jim wants to catch another one. A few minutes later, he successfully reels in a big fish, exactly the plump trout they love to eat the most. The two cheer excitedly. Men's joy is just that simple. After having their fun, they return to harvesting ice. To ensure the ice lasts longer, they use the chainsaw to cut off the oxygen-rich white ice on the surface, leaving only the denser blue ice at the bottom. These high-quality blue ice blocks, if stored properly, can last until next autumn. Then they fill the ice hole with crushed ice to prevent anyone from accidentally falling in. Finally, the two return home with the ice blocks, carrying them into the cellar one by one until the work is completely finished. At night, a late winter snowstorm sweeps across the northern forest. This might be the last snow before spring. Charlie decides to seize the tail end of winter to gather some more firewood, as the snow provides a smooth surface for dragging logs. Soon, the two arrive at the lake, where there are several dead cedars. Charlie wants to exercise his injured arm. He starts the chainsaw, and under Jim's worried gaze, Charlie swiftly chops down a cedar. True to his logger background, his skills are not rusty at all. After he removes the branches from the trunk, Jim uses the snowmobile to drag the timber onto the ice. The first few trees go smoothly, but the last one is relatively tall, making Jim somewhat worried. Logging is inherently dangerous work, and Charlie's shoulder injury only increases the risk. Sure enough, the falling tree suddenly deviates from its intended direction. The two shout in panic. Fortunately, it is a false alarm, and the large tree safely falls onto an open space. This log weighs half a ton, and even with the help of the snow, it must be dragged carefully. Once on the ice, Charlie cuts the log into small, manageable sections. Because these trees are dead, there is a lot of soft sawdust inside the trunks. This is the best natural tinder, and if spread over the ice blocks, it helps extend their lifespan, maximizing the seller's efficiency, so it absolutely cannot be wasted. They load all of this onto the sled. When they get home, they stack the wood neatly, then take the sawdust to the cellar and spread it evenly over the ice blocks. After finishing these tasks, Charlie sincerely thanks Jim. Although a task is completed, he has no time to rest. Because the shoulder injury cost him a precious month, he must make the most of the remaining harsh winter to acquire more pelts. Because he cannot exert force with one arm, he has to use pliers for assistance. But this is a very dangerous act, and he must be extremely careful. However, an accident still happens. Under the recoil of the spring, the pliers strike his hand hard, causing him to grimace in pain. Having learned from this lesson, Charlie becomes much more cautious. Fortunately, he successfully opens the trap this time, but accidentally drops the pliers onto the ice. The ice here is very thin, and he cannot rashly step on it. So, he has a quick-witted idea and uses his axe to hook them back. After setting this trap, he goes to check a few he had set previously. Unfortunately, the first trap is totally empty. With a disappointed heart, he arrives at the second trap and shines his flashlight on the ice, but it is also empty. When checking the third trap, a heavy feeling makes his heart skip a beat. But he rejoiced too soon. Not only is it empty, but he also accidentally triggers the trap. Charlie's mindset instantly collapses, and he angrily throws a branch far away. After adjusting his mood, he heads east to check the other traps. Here, the breath of spring is much stronger, and the ice has already melted. When he steps into the freezing river water to retrieve a trap, he is pleasantly surprised to find that it has actually caught prey. Although it is only a relatively small beaver, it is enough to soothe his wounded spirit. Even more gratifying, the next trap has also caught a beaver. A smile blooms on Charlie's face once again, and he heads home happily. Half a month later, it means the trapping season has officially ended. Charlie has been through a long and difficult season. Today he tallies all his harvest, including a few pairs of antlers, several marten pelts, a stack of beaver pelts, and even a red fox pelt. But this is far below his expectations. If not for the shoulder injury, he wouldn't have wasted a golden month. Every time he thinks about this, he grinds his teeth in frustration. And to make matters worse, it is said that this year's prices are much lower than last year's. Charlie verifies the number of pelts over and over again, and after confirming they haven't multiplied, he bundles them up. Due to the poor harvest this year, his friends advise him to give up this lifestyle, and return to the ranks of loggers. But Charlie does not want to compromise just like that. After all, this has been his dream since childhood. Northern Maine is sparsely populated, with only about 50 small towns scattered across approximately 7,000 square miles of land. Charlie drives 70 miles to reach the nearest town, enters a fur company, and hands his goods over to the boss. The boss carefully inspects each pelt, notes the numbers in his ledger, and finally arrives at a total. This is a far cry from the $40,000 a year Charlie made logging, so he has to find another way to increase his income. Despite the numerous difficulties, it is impossible for Charlie to go back to logging. He doesn't want to work at the whims of a boss anymore. Here, every morning light rises just for him, and every snowflake falls just for him. This boundless freedom is something no salary can measure. Through this year of mountain life, Charlie has found the meaning of life. If a person has no dreams, what meaning does their life have? At this moment, Charlie's soul is sublimated. This might be the lifestyle that wage earners yearn for the most. No fixed residence is needed. As long as you have a tent, anywhere is home. Raise a few obedient dogs, rely on nature's bounty for food, breathe the free air, and enjoy this happy life. This is the Teton Range at the border of Idaho and Wyoming. The pristine natural landscape has become a paradise for wildlife, attracting mountain men who love nature. Like George, his home is just a tent. Following the changing seasons, he migrates between different altitudes, living an almost primitive life. However, George is not alone. Several loyal sled dogs always accompany him. This morning, he sets out to hunt with 6 sled dogs. The tradition of dog sledding has continued for tens of thousands of years. On these rugged mountain trails, a sled is always the best choice, capable of reaching speeds of 15 miles per hour. Under George's specific voice commands, the sled dogs stop in unison. George uses a snow hook to secure the sled, preventing the dogs from running around. But an accident happens this time. Perhaps misunderstanding the command, the dogs suddenly start running on their own. Shouting loudly, George manages to stop the sled dogs just in time. But just as he relaxes his guard, the dogs bolt again, dragging him straight to the ground. Fortunately, the thick snow cushions his fall, sparing him from injury. After resecuring the foot brake, George puts on his snowshoes and ventures deep into the woods alone to look for prey. Soon he discovers traces of pine marten activity. Right next to it is a fallen tree, perfectly suited for setting a trap. George takes out a trap, secures it to a slanted branch, and ties on some bait, completing the pine marten trap setup. Because wolves roam this area, his friend's dog was once killed by them. George doesn't dare leave his sled dogs for too long. Seeing him return, the dogs are very excited. The team now moves on, but as they progress, George notices that one dog's gait is a bit strange. He immediately stops to check and finds that the dog might have injured its neck. To prevent the injury from worsening, he places the dog on the sled and decides to end today's journey early. Back at the camp, health is the most critical factor that cannot be ignored. After all, the hospital is too far away. Once injured, you can only leave it to fate. The next day, George decides to head out alone, giving the hardworking sled dogs a day off. Even wearing specially made snowshoes, trudging through the deep snow remains incredibly difficult. As he walks, he ponders his future path. As temperatures begin to rise, George plans to stay in the highlands for another 2 weeks before moving to a lower elevation of 2,000 meters. After some time, he arrives at the first trap, but unfortunately, it yields nothing. Slightly disappointed, he continues onward. When he reaches the second trap, a wave of pleasant surprise hits him. It has caught a pine marten. However, to his regret, it is a female. In fact, George doesn't want to catch female pine martens because one female can give birth to 4 or 5 kits a year. Therefore, he aims to catch the relatively less useful males. After a grueling 4-hour trek, George finally rushes back to camp before sunset, only to witness a frustrating scene. A little black dog is frantically tearing at the tent. Hearing its owner's footsteps, it tries to pull away but gets stuck in the fabric. Man and dog lock eyes. The guilty black dog is at a loss for what to do. George scolds him angrily and then inspects the tent, finding the damage to be quite severe. The biting cold wind will continuously pour in through the holes, making the night a disaster. Left with no choice, George has to make a change. He must immediately relocate to a safer, lower altitude and figure out how to repair the tent once the weather improves. At the foot of the Teton Range lies a beautiful valley, known locally as the Snake River Valley. George moves his new home here. The next day brings beautiful sunny weather. Paddling a canoe, he admires the scenery while searching for prey. With the change in altitude, his targets shift from alpine animals to common riverside creatures like muskrats, raccoons, and beavers. He sets some traps in hidden spots. Once the main tasks are done, he starts looking for a place to set up camp. The terrain must be elevated, or it will be flooded. He ties several long wooden poles together, stands them up one by one to construct a sturdy conical frame, and finally wraps the entire structure in a waterproof tarp. As the afterglow of the sunset spills over the tent, George is already lying inside, sleeping soundly. Early the next morning, feeling refreshed, George prepares to check the traps. Although the dogs want to tag along, the narrow canoe simply cannot hold them, so he has to set out alone. Arriving at the first trap, he finds the water level has visibly risen. Reaching into the water to feel around, his fingertips suddenly touch something furry. It turns out to be a plump muskrat, a true delicacy. In a nearby trap, he also catches a much larger beaver. Beaver meat is one of the dog's favorite foods. Today's harvest is very satisfying. When he returns to camp, the sled dogs greet him with excitement. George decides to get a good night's rest and enjoy the catch tomorrow. The next morning, George admires the brilliant sunrise while planning how to cook a delicious breakfast with the beaver meat. But when he arrives at the spot where he stored the prey, the sight before him leaves him instantly dumbfounded. The beaver he worked so hard to catch yesterday has vanished into thin air. Only a few scattered remains and bloodstains are left on the ground. Judging by the tracks, this was likely the work of a mountain lion. This leaves George furious yet helpless. He can only accept his bad luck. A few days later, George paddles his boat to continue searching for prey. Since the mountain lion stole the beaver, he hasn't caught anything new. The food in the camp is nearly gone, and for the past few days he has barely been getting by on a small amount of cured meat. But bad news keeps coming. The first trap is destroyed. The prey broke free and escaped. After resetting it, he heads to the next spot, but the trap here is frozen solid. Cold weather can sometimes render traps useless. With a disappointed heart, he continues checking the traps, but no miracle occurs. The next one is equally empty. Seeing his emaciated dogs, George feels both heartache and deep self-blame. Now, survival has become the biggest challenge. Just when George is at a loss, the next trap finally brings hope. It's a raccoon. Although raccoon meat cannot be eaten due to parasite issues, the precious pelt can be traded for other supplies. However, this doesn't solve his immediate problem. Just as George is about to fall into despair, the final trap finally provides an answer. It's a plump muskrat. Muskrats are actually clean animals, free of parasites and rich in fat, making them a famous local delicacy. George can't wait any longer. He cleans the muskrat on the riverbank, starts a fire right there, and begins roasting the meat. Moments later, a tantalizing aroma fills the air, leaving the man and his dogs practically drooling with hunger. George takes a bite of the meat to taste it. The piping hot roast melts in his mouth, giving him a euphoric feeling. Of course, he hasn't forgotten his partners. A dog grabs a piece of meat and runs to a corner to enjoy it. Watching it wolf down the food, George finds it both amusing and heartbreaking. Although this crisis is temporarily resolved, as long as he lives in this unforgiving wilderness, the challenges will never end. But this is exactly the charm of wilderness life. As long as he breathes, he will persevere to the very end. Is this the wilderness life you've been yearning for? To stock up on meat for the winter, taking down a 1,000-pound bison with a single shot. If you get tired of that, there are tender and delicious wild ducks. And in your spare time, you can rely on furs to make a living. It's a life of true leisure and freedom. Kodiak Island, in southern Alaska, is a place where beauty and danger coexist. Mike is a bear hunting guide who lives side by side with his hunting dog. He starts his day just as dawn breaks. Today's mission is to go hunting to hoard the meat needed for the winter. Last year's snowstorm caused a massive die-off of deer, so this time he's heading to the neighboring coast, hoping the deer herds there haven't been heavily decimated. This is Mike's newly purchased boat, featuring an amphibious design. With the push of a button, it can transform from a boat into a vehicle. It utilizes a triple hydraulic power system and is equipped with deep tread tires to handle various rugged terrains. Once it touches the seawater, the wheels retract like landing gear, allowing it to navigate the ocean freely. The waves are a bit rough today, feeling like the prelude to a storm, and thick fog has reduced visibility. Fortunately, the boat is equipped with a depth sounder. When it gets too close to the rocks, it beeps, allowing Mike to adjust his course in time. The surrounding coastline is completely rocky, so he decides to push further in to find a safer landing spot. As a light rain begins to fall, a storm is clearly approaching. He finds a suitable landing spot and prepares to lower the wheels. But, for some reason, the hydraulic system won't start. Mike drops the anchor to secure the boat in place and starts looking for the problem. Water might have gotten into the lines. He takes out a handy bottle of antifreeze made of methanol, which can absorb water contaminating the fuel lines. After waiting a moment, Mike restarts the system, and this time, it works without a hitch. Bumping along, he drives onto the shore and stops at a higher elevation. Mike drapes a tarp over the boat and then starts looking for firewood. He unexpectedly finds an old buoy, which makes a great container for a fire. He uses his knife to cut an opening at the top and lights a fire inside. The flames grow stronger, finally bringing him a touch of warmth. He will spend the night here and begin the hunt tomorrow. The next morning, Mike wakes up early and walks along the beach with his dog. The tide has just receded, and deer might come down to enjoy their breakfast, feeding on kelp and seaweed. His food reserves at home are down to just over 10 pounds of salmon. Without meat, this winter will be agonizing. Hunting season is coming to an end, making this his last planned hunt. Mike decides to sit and wait. A few seabirds watch curiously nearby. He takes out his binoculars for a grid search. He doesn't spot any deer, but he does find a few seals. They don't seem afraid of humans at all. After waiting a while with no sign of his target, Mike decides to climb the hillside to look for tracks. He quickly finds a severed deer leg, but this isn't the sight he was hoping for. If there are too many predators here, it's highly detrimental to the deer population's growth. Now, Mike prepares to climb higher up the mountain to investigate. To lighten his load, he leaves most of his gear up in a tree, then leads his dog up the mountain. The snow on the mountain is thick, severely slowing Mike down. The wind is also fierce, stinging his face. Man and dog climb with great difficulty. Soon, he spots a hoof print in the snow. This discovery is a huge morale booster. Gathering his energy, he pushes all the way to the peak in one breath. The good news is that he immediately spots a lone deer. Unfortunately, the distance is too great, well beyond his shooting range. At the same time, Mike realizes a problem. It's a doe. While hunting her would provide meat, it would further damage the already dwindling deer population. Because of this, Mike decides to give up the hunt, leaving the herd ample room to recover. He returns to his boat, ready to head back to the woodlands, and begins rethinking his plan for acquiring food. A few days pass in the blink of an eye. Taking advantage of the clear weather, Mike sets out once again on his journey to find food. 25 miles away from home is Whale Island, known for its vast network of streams. It attracts an abundance of birds, as well as animals like otters and beavers that make their homes here. It doesn't take long before he enters a tributary. The water here is a bit shallow. Slightly concerned, Mike measures the depth to ensure he won't run aground, travels a bit further, and finally finds a suitable landing spot. Mike grabs his rifle and walks into the woods. There is a clear stream here, and by walking upstream, he can find its source. Not far along, a pond appears before him, much larger than he imagined. On the bank stands a large tree with more than half of its bark gnawed off. At first glance, it's clearly the work of a beaver. They must be starving. Otherwise, they wouldn't chew on spruce bark. Experience tells Mike that there's a beaver lodge here, housing a large number of beavers. Therefore, trapping beavers is a good option right now. There's an animal trail here, one of the paths the beavers use to get in and out. Mike decides to set a trap here. He takes out a body grip trap, tinkers with it a bit, and secures it in place with some sticks. This trap will serve as a test run. If it catches something tomorrow, Mike will stay and continue trapping. If not, he'll look for the next location. To increase the chances of a successful test, he sets up as many traps as possible nearby. After finishing up, he heads back to the river to look for dinner. He happens to see a few ducks flying past. Walking forward, he comes across a lone duck preparing to take off, and Mike takes it down with a single shot. Afterwards, Mike needs to find a place to spend the night. There are some public hunting cabins around here. Seeing a buoy hanging from a tree, he knows it's likely the marker for a cabin. Just as he arrives, he spots bear prints on the ground, reminding him to stay extra cautious. He slowly pushes open the door. Fortunately, it's safe inside. Mike gets a fire going and starts preparing a delicious dinner. When the duck is about medium well, he and his dog share the meal. The taste is absolutely fantastic, and as he eats, he looks forward to tomorrow's harvest. Hoping the beaver trap would bring him a surprise, Mike woke up the next day and stepped outside with his hunting dog. He ended up seeing fox tracks in the yard. Not surprisingly, the smell of the roasted meat had attracted them. Mike planned to deal with it when he returned in the evening. Right now, his top priority was checking the traps. Yesterday, he had placed several traps by the pond and stream to scout the local game. Arriving at the first location, a surprise was indeed waiting for him. An otter was lying in the trap. The hound walked up and sniffed it. Mike noticed a line of tracks on the ground nearby. It seemed the otter had come from that direction. This was a fully grown adult. Once the pelt was tanned and dried, it could bring in about $200. Mike reset the trap and moved on to check the others. The fresh snow from last night provided a distinct advantage, allowing him to see animal tracks at a glance, which was incredibly helpful for his trapping efforts. The stream ahead was the site of the second trap, but unfortunately, it had vanished into thin air. Just then, Mike discovered bear prints in the nearby snow. It seemed that guy had stolen his catch. This instantly made Mike furious. It was bad enough that the blasted bear had stolen the prey, but it had also taken the trap with it. It seemed this area was no longer suitable for setting traps, as the bear would surely return to enjoy another free buffet. Mike still had 6 more traps to check. Soon, his mood turned from cloudy to sunny, as a beaver was caught in the next one. Mike lifted it for inspection. It was plump and strong, an exceptionally high-quality catch. It looked like there was a beaver family living here. A beaver dam usually houses over a dozen beavers. Packing away his catch, Mike continued his rounds, but unfortunately, the remaining traps yielded nothing. One trap came close to succeeding, but judging from the tracks, 3 animals had perfectly bypassed the device. Mike decided to readjust it, aiming to give those cunning critters a surprise. Back at the hunting cabin, Mike needed to start processing the beaver, stripping the pelt before it could spoil. Tossing the beaver onto the cutting board, the dog eyed the prey covetously. He first cut off the beaver's feet, then sliced upwards along the belly. It didn't take long to perfectly skin the entire pelt. That was another $200 in the bag. Because the island was heavily populated with brown bears, the beaver carcass couldn't be left inside, lest it attract terrifying predators in the middle of the night. However, Mike still cut off a hind leg to make dinner for his dog. He then removed the beaver's scent glands, which he planned to use to trap foxes. He tied the gland to a trap and secured it to a fallen tree. Afterward, he went back inside to continue processing the otter pelt. Otters are different from beavers, and the skinning method varies significantly. After opening up the tail, the animal has to be hung up. By carefully slicing the skin along the joints, the pelt can finally be peeled off intact. Holding the beaver pelt in one hand and the otter pelt in the other, harvesting 2 furs in a single day left Mike's eyes filled with satisfaction. These pelts could be sold to tourists or sent to an auction house for trading. Riding this wave of excitement, he decided to check the fox trap. It had only been set for a few hours. Perhaps Lady Luck was smiling upon him today, because a fox was clearly lying in the trap, and a beautiful red fox at that. It is considered one of the rarest pelts, with a value far exceeding that of a beaver's. This prompted Mike to make a major decision. He would continue staying on this island until he filled his boat with furs. Some time passed. A bush plane was flying over a treacherous, rocky area, carrying the pilot and Mike. As of yet, he still hadn't secured his winter meat. Because the deer herds had suffered a natural disaster, their numbers hadn't recovered to normal levels. Mike needed to travel to a much more remote area to hunt. In the far west of the archipelago lies a small island that, over 100 years ago, was a gathering place for whalers and fur traders. At that time, cattle were brought to the island as a food source for these people. Today, the island is uninhabited year-round, and these cattle have returned to nature, growing wildly into feral herds. The key is that anyone can harvest this beef. Since the hunting season had ended, Mike only managed to secure a 1-day hunting permit. No matter the outcome, he had to leave on the plane tomorrow. Finally, the plane landed steadily on the water, the commotion startling some seabirds. It seemed the local resources were quite abundant. After bidding the pilot farewell, Mike officially set foot on the island. To assess the situation, he planned to climb the nearby hillside first. Along the way, he saw some skeletal remains, clearly the victims of a kill. It seemed wild beasts also inhabited this place. Mike then reached the high ground, searching everywhere for signs of the cattle herd. He hoped to spot his target close to the beach. If it was too far away, even a successful hunt would make it incredibly difficult to transport the meat back. After some searching, his long-awaited target appeared, though the distance was beyond his shooting range. But he had no choice and no time to hesitate. He chased in the direction of the herd. Before long, he spotted a lone bull about 100 yards away. Mike decided to make it his target. Holding his rifle, he slowly lay down and took aim. Waiting for the perfect angle, Mike dropped the bull to the ground with a single shot. Walking up to it, the prey had already stopped breathing. This bull could provide at least 500 pounds of meat. Mike needed to butcher it quickly. There was only a little over an hour left until sunset. To cut through the bone, he used a sharp hacksaw, which made a grinding noise with every pull. At that moment, a fox, drawn by the smell of blood, approached. Seeing Mike radiating a fierce presence, it didn't dare come close. Compared to a weak fox, he was far more worried about brown bears or a cunning pack of wolves. Rushing against the clock, he managed to pack up most of the meat. Since the plane wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, Mike covered the meat with a tarp. However, he couldn't mask the scent, which might attract predators tonight. Mike planned to campone 100 yards away so he could protect himself while being close enough to defend his catch at a moment's notice. He built a simple shelter out of the tarp and some wood, then crawled inside to rest. When the first light of the next day arrived, Mike woke from his sleep. He immediately went to check on his catch and found everything perfectly intact. Today, he had to haul the beef to the rendezvous point, and he could only carry a little over 100 pounds at a time. Because of this, he had to make 5 trips to carry it all back. Constantly climbing the hills along the way was a massive drain on his stamina. Mike stopped to gasp for air, somewhat regretting traveling this far just to hunt a bull. At this rate, it would be extremely difficult to bring all the meat home. Time ticked by, and 3 hours passed before he completed just one round trip. Based on his scheduled pickup time, he could only haul one more load, which left him feeling very frustrated. After some thought, he decided on a risky approach, transporting the beef by sea. But he needed to wait for high tide. This would be his only chance. In the meantime, he had to do some prep work. He pulled out an inflatable raft, pumped it full of air, and then loaded the beef onto it piece by piece, tying everything down securely. Mike grabbed the rope and walked down along the shore. With the help of the water's buoyancy, pulling the raft felt incredibly effortless. The only trouble was that the underwater area was littered with rocks, making the trek a bit arduous. But compared to that, the real challenge was the steep cliffs, where there was simply no easy place to find footing. Coupled with the crashing waves, Mike endured a lot of hardship. Fortunately, he managed to struggle through this treacherous stretch. The rest of the journey was much smoother, and a few hours later, he arrived at the rendezvous point. He was already half an hour past the agreed time, yet the plane was nowhere to be seen. Just as Mike started to worry, the plane finally arrived. Now, he could take his hard-earned spoils home. Sometime later, early in the morning, Mike brewed a cup of tea to quench his thirst. Today's task was to repair his hunting cabin. He is a bear hunting guide, and every bear hunting season, tourists flock here to experience the thrill of the hunt. With only 10 days left before the first batch of tourists arrived, he had to get to work. First, Mike nailed some wooden furring strips to the walls and took measurements. Next, he cut aluminum panels into the desired shapes, fitted them into place, and found they matched perfectly. He then used a power drill to secure them to the wall. Using the same method, he cladded the entire wall. The aluminum panels would help retain heat inside and also act as a deterrent against wild beasts who love to scavenge around hunting cabins. And the ultimate weapon against brown bears? A board covered in sharp nails. Placing it at the door would surely leave any visiting brown bear with an unforgettable memory. The second step in repairing the cabin was solving the heating issue. Mike moved a stove inside. Now he needed to assemble the stovepipe, using a hole in the wall as the chimney exit. He drove screws in to secure the pipe, completing the indoor assembly, then went outside to connect the exterior section. Afterward, he brought in some firewood to test the stove's draft. Gradually, wisps of smoke rose from the chimney. Mike checked inside. No smoke was leaking from the pipes, meaning it was working perfectly. Considering the cabin lacked a refrigerator, Mike decided to build one. He cut a rectangular opening in the wall, designed a wooden box frame, and assembled it. Sliding it into the wall, he found the cut was a perfect fit. Back inside, Mike inserted a plastic cooler bin into the frame. It was exactly the result he wanted. In wilderness survival, food and water are the most critical elements. Mike needed to install a water collection system. He found a plastic barrel and started modifying it, cutting an inlet at the top and designing 2 outlets, one at the bottom and an overflow near the top. He drilled a hole in the wall and inserted a pipe, completing the assembly. Water would flow in from the top and store in the barrel, while a faucet extended from the bottom. If rainfall exceeded 40 gallons, the excess water would drain outside through the side pipe. Next, Mike went outside and diagonally attached a rain gutter along the roof's lower edge to catch the water. To test it, he poured a bucket of water onto the roof to simulate rain. Returning inside, he found the barrel had successfully collected the water. He turned on the faucet, and the water flowed out smoothly. With everything ready, Mike could now peacefully await the arrival of his tourists. Over in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho, Harry and Kid run a ranch. Last year, they bought 40 cows, and the calves have now grown up. Come winter, meat becomes extremely scarce, and prices can skyrocket to several times the usual amount. To prepare, The two brothers planned to build a smokehouse to preserve their meat and prevent it from spoiling. While the ground wasn't completely frozen yet, they needed to clear a space right up against a steep hillside to block the bitter north wind. The bad news was that the soil was rock hard. To save energy, they decided to thaw it with fire. They chopped a massive amount of firewood, and once the coals were hot, added 2 large logs on top. The fire burned fiercely for 2 hours. After clearing away the charcoal, they resumed digging, which was noticeably easier this time. After digging for quite a while, Kid measured the area and confirmed the space was sufficient. To prevent a landslide, they laid down a metal base, built a wooden retaining wall, and propped it up with large stones. Just as they were busy working, an accident occurred. The dirt bank collapsed, sending a heavy load of soil crashing down onto Kid. He looked a bit battered, but thankfully, he wasn't injured. After calming their nerves, they got back to work. They built the wall higher while backfilling it with dirt to stabilize the entire structure. Next came the foundation. They used crosties treated with creosote, which provided strong rot resistance. They arranged them into a rectangle and began stacking pine logs for the walls. They carved notches into the ends of each log to ensure a tight fit. For added stability, they drove extra long iron spikes into the joints. Step by step, the high walls were stacked, and the cabin gradually took shape. Having built many similar structures in the past, the two were highly proficient. Soon, only the roof remained. They cut pieces of rebar and forged them into spikes, driving them into the logs while leaving half a foot exposed to support the next tier. They continued this process until the roof was completely sealed. With that, the smokehouse was successfully completed, leaving them both highly satisfied. A smokehouse isn't complete without a wood-burning stove. The next day, they went to their workshop, where they had 2 intact oil drums, perfect for a conversion. They first cut a rectangular opening at the top of one drum and welded 4 legs to the side. Before long, it looked like a proper stove. Then, Kid attached a door to the opening. The plan was to stack the 2 drums together and connect them with a pipe in the middle. After some assembly, a dual-drum combustion stove was born. They moved it outside the smokehouse. To test out their new setup, they grabbed their gear and went hunting. Just then, a pheasant flew past, instantly catching their attention. Kid immediately took aim and shot it down. His marksmanship was absolutely explosive. His brother Harry was no slouch either. By the end of the day, they had bagged a total of 3 plump, delicious pheasants. They brought the birds back to the smokehouse and gathered a large amount of applewood to light the stove. The entire smoking process would last 12 hours. This wood not only burns slowly but also releases a fragrant aroma. Soon, smoke began to fill the smokehouse. Seeing everything going smoothly, Kid got ready to process the pheasants. These were all roosters, boasting beautiful plumage. Kid roughly stripped off the skin. Harry opened the door, and a thick cloud of smoke instantly billowed out. Holding his breath, he hung the meat on the wooden racks, his eyes tearing up from the heavy smoke. The two quickly escaped and slammed the door shut. The successful construction of the smokehouse signaled that their operation was reaching a new peak. The brothers also planned to make their own bullets. Kid poured lead pellets into an iron pot of snow for rapid cooling. Just like that, they obtained over a dozen perfectly round bullets. Now, decided to climb a high peak to get a bird's eye view. However, the mountain trail was rugged and fraught with danger. They had a few bison right in front of them. The two ducked behind a rock to hide, peeking out stealthily. The bison's figures became clearer, and they began selecting their target. A young bull perfectly fit their needs. Kid chambered around and took aim second round, only to find his line of sight blocked by trees. However, judging from the bison's movements, it was definitely hit. They decided to track it. A wounded bison is highly... Sometime later, they finally spotted the bison in the brush. As they slowly approached, the bison suddenly stood up. Kid quickly fired a follow-up shot. The bison tried to flee again, but its injuries were too severe. It took a few steps and collapsed to the ground. This time, it was truly dead. Only by getting close could they $1,000, and the skull could be sold for $500. But the real prize was the meat. Bison meat is worth 3 times as much as regular beef. While Kid was busy, Harry returned with several horses. The two began sorting, crossing one after another. The water depth seemed manageable, but the mule was a bit short. Another river appeared. The team entered the water one by one. The current here was much swifter, turning the scene into a chaotic scramble. During the crossing, the mule accidentally dropped its pack into the water. Harry quickly jumped in and grabbed it. Amidst the frantic rush, the team successfully reached the shore. A quick inventory revealed they had lost 1 pack and the bison skull. But they had no time to look for them now, as they were soaked to the bone. If they couldn't get warm in time, it would be life-threatening. They immediately built a fire. Taking off his soaking wet pants, Harry revealed his fetching red long johns. The two wrung out their socks and hung them on a nearby branch. Once their bodies warmed up a bit, Kid tried to find the lost items. The lost pack contained prime tenderloin, and a $500 bison head was definitely not something to abandon. Probing the water with a stick, he felt something at the bottom. To hook it, Kid used a forked branch to craft a tool resembling a trident, tying it to a long pole with a rope. Kid waded back into the river and started fishing for it. After several attempts, he hooked the rope and handed it to Harry. Pulling hard, they finally retrieved the pack, but a lot of river water had seeped in, putting the beef inside at risk. Returning to the ranch became even more urgent, but they couldn't bear to leave the skull. The two separated to search, and Kid found the bison head lying quietly at the bottom of the river. Working together, they hauled it out. After resecuring their supplies, they continued their journey. Once back at the ranch, they moved the packs to the smokehouse and hung the cuts of meat on the walls to smoke. They had to speed up the process. The fragrant applewood would give the smoked meat a special flavor. Soon, thick smoke billowed from the cracks. This process would take several days. Now, they had to process the bison hide. The untanned pelt was still incredibly heavy. Working together, they hoisted it onto the workbench. First, they had to scrape off the fat. Because of its massive size, just scraping took an hour. Tanning the hide required the animal's brain matter. They extracted the brains from the bison skull, added water, and heated it while stirring it into a thick paste. They then rubbed this liquid into the hide to soften it. This is an ancient tanning technique. Once the application was complete, they were ready to go and enjoy their dinner.